So I've been following the story of Ravi Zacharias for 3, 4 years now. Back in 2018, I reviewed Steve Baughman's book, Cover Up in the Kingdom. And in that book, he went into some significant detail on the extent to which Ravi Zacharias has fabricated his academic history, his resume, and also the allegations that he had engaged in an inappropriate and exploitive relationship with Lorianne Thompson. So those allegations have been out there for a while. And there was a story that broke in Christianity Today back in October, which finally prompted RZIM, really forced their hand to undertake a formal investigation of those allegations against Mr. Zacharias. And so it was undertaken by an independent investigator, Miller and Martin, and they just published or delivered their report, their investigation report to RZIM, which was then released. They released it to the public, and it's a pretty damning report. So Christianity Today has just in the last couple of days reported on it. And it, among other things, goes into evidence that Mr. Zacharias was engaged in multiple inappropriate relationships with women in various contexts, including various massage parlors, that he had gathered so many inappropriate images of women on his phones and other social media accounts, among other issues, that he was using potentially funds from the organizations to support various relationships. So I thought that this would be a great time to sort of debrief the report and some of the bigger issues that it raises. And I thought there's no one better to do that with than to a friend of mine, Bob Stenhouse. Now, Bob is Executive Director of Veritas Solutions. And Bob, I think it would be great for you just to share with us a bit, first of all, about your history, which is absolutely fascinating in terms of your police and investigatory background, and then a little bit of how you established Veritas Solutions and what it is that you do.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Randall. Thanks for allowing me to be here and speak with you and your audience on this incident, or a series of incidents, I suppose. So my background, I've been doing investigations. I think I'm in my 37th year of investigations of some sort or another. I spent 20 years in the RCMP. For your viewers that are not in Canada, that's the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. That's the Mounties on the horses, except we never rode a horse. In any event, I spent 20 years. Most of my career in the RCMP was in deep undercover, organized crime, serious crime, major crime, homicide. So all of the serious type investigations, primarily in plainclothes investigator, as well as deep undercover as well. My undercover roles, I've got lots of pictures of some of the things I did undercover, but I've spent a lot of time in the company of serious predatory type of men, either in a homicide concept or construct or sexual predator type of behavior. And I've been in jail in an undercover capacity with serial killers. I've targeted and infiltrated serial killers. And so spent a lot of time in that, kind of environment from a deep undercover perspective. They didn't know who I was. After my RCMP career ended, I ended up going into private investigations, primarily focusing on harassment, sexual violence, or violence in the workplace. I did that as a consultant, a human rights investigator back in the early 2000s. And then I went on for 10 years and I kind of launched and pioneered a corporate investigations unit for the largest health authority in Canada, if not North America, I believe, 110,000 employees, Alberta Health Services. I did that for 10 years. And within that context of the corporate investigations unit, we investigated the worst of the worst types of cases that you could imagine that would go on when there's vulnerable people. So in other words, when you have those predatory type of, again, primarily men, I've not personally investigated predatory behavior with women. I understand it does happen, but I've not personally investigated that. So it's primarily male predatory type of behavior with patients, colleagues, anyone where they have a little bit of power over, and did that for 10 years. And in 2018, I ended up launching my own firm, Veritas Solutions, where we primarily focus on what I call person-on-person offenses in the workplace or regulatory. So that's everything from the lower end of the spectrum of maybe a low-end bullying type of case, harassment, serious harassment, sexual harassment, all the way up to sexual and physical violence. And we have a variety of clients all over Western Canada. And I also teach. So I teach on the topic that you're actually talking about. I have a specific module in my course that I teach. I've taught, I think it's over 1,000, primarily human resources and health and safety professionals on how to investigate these types of wrongdoings in the workplace. And my one module is actually called Investigating the Dark Triad. And it's based on a book called The Dark Triad of Personality. And it talks about sociopathic or antisocial personality disorder, narcissism, malignant narcissism, and or Machiavellianism. And I use that book as a backdrop for some of the cases that I've investigated that are very similar to the Ravi Zacharias case.
Yeah, and we should also add, of course, in full disclosure, I work as a part-time investigator for Veritas Solutions, and we've known each other for about 17 years now.
We have. You were my my theology professor when I did my master's of theology at Taylor, and just a plug for Randall. He's an awesome investigator, so he speaks truth.
And I love the line on your, just by your shoulder there, to seek truth and speak truth. I mean, I think this is a wonderful opportunity for us to be doing that.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to begin then with reading one paragraph. When I read through the report that was released by RZIM, this was, I mean, there's a lot in there. It's really packed, as you know. I mean, it's a summary report of only 12 pages or so, but there's a lot in there. So I pulled out this one paragraph. What I want to do is just read it, because I think this really outlines, in the case of one relationship that Ravi had with one individual, some patterns. And I'd like to just get your professional opinion on what you're seeing there in terms of predatory behavior, sort of the red flags and the methods that are being used and so on, based upon that description. So Absolutely. Here it is. Yep. Okay. This witness told us that their relationship began as a normal massage therapist-client relationship, and she came to think of him as a father figure. He elicited information about her faith and her financial situation. She reported that after he arranged for the ministry to provide her with financial support, he required sex from her. According to this witness, Mr. Zacharias used religious expressions to gain compliance, as she was raised to be a person of faith. She reported that he made her pray with him to thank God for the opportunity they both received. She said he called her his reward for living a life of service to God, and he referenced the godly men in the Bible with more than one wife. She said he warned her not ever to speak out against him, or she would be responsible for millions of souls whose salvation would be lost if his reputation was damaged. So just tell me, what are you hearing there in terms of predatory behaviors?
Well, I mean, other than my visceral reaction of, that this is someone's sister and someone's daughter or someone's mom. And my visceral reaction of that type of behavior, first off, it follows a classic pattern. Like it really does. And so when people say, when people come forward, when victims come forward and they share these stories, it's classic. I mean, it's classic grooming behavior. He's using his position of power, right? The power differential. I mean, regardless of whether she reports to him or not, there's a power differential within the Christian circles. I mean, this guy was a rock star apologist, and with a international ministry, could do no wrong. So you've got that natural power differential, and then you've got a vulnerability. Telling him about her finances and those types of things. Well, maybe the church can help or the ministry can help. So you've got the vulnerability, you've got the power differential, you've got classic grooming, you've got opportunity because he's, accepting a legitimate, presumably, massage from this woman. She's obviously a massage therapist. You've got all of those pieces all together. and the guilt trip, and then playing on her faith, right? Her probably a little bit of a naive understanding of faith, but playing on faith. The guilt trip of, if you expose this, you're going to, it's going to affect, millions of souls, whatever he said. This guy screams at me. He screams con artist. It's classic. It's absolutely classic. And I've investigated several like it, not at his level, but it's a classic pattern.
Now, I mentioned in Boffman's book that he identifies, among other things, that Ravi was constantly embellishing his credentials. Is that something that you observe as well in these kinds of predators?
Absolutely, Randall. I want to tell you about two cases, and I won't tell you all the details about the cases, but they happened very close together when I was with my former role in the health region. And they were absolutely classic. And they started off as sexual harassment investigations. And one of them was a sexual assault at the lower end of the spectrum. And the first thing I looked at was the resumes. And because what had happened is that these both men, both in different departments, totally different backgrounds, different parts of the province, but part of their grooming tactics was these larger than life embellishments of their background, their education. In one case, the guy ended up, he claimed to have a master's degree. I did a quick Google search. It was a diploma mill. No accreditation. You buy your master's degree for $300, write a 2-page essay, and then we'll take into account your, your life skills, like your life experiences, and you get your master's degree. He went on to actually claim to have a PhD in ethics with one of his former employers, and his resume was an absolute fraud. It was a fraud from start to finish. Now, the problem with that is that the fraud starts 10, 15 years ago, and then all of a sudden there's some legitimacy. And so now he's into a legitimate employment situation where he's legitimately a director of a certain department, those types of things. But as I traced it back, it was based on the foundation was a fraud. And so, this is, when I was first reading about Ravi Zacharias and Bachman's book, I was reading articles. I haven't read the book, and it didn't surprise me. And it also doesn't surprise me is that on top of that fraud comes this level of sexual predatory behavior.
Right. It's part of a bigger pattern, and presumably, if you're going to lie in some areas, you'll be more inclined to lie in others, right?
Well, and frankly, someone that's engaging that behavior become pathological liars. I mean, it's just lie upon lie upon lie, right? With all of these kind of, if you look at the legitimacy of the ministry as a whole, presumably, I'm guessing, I don't know much about the ministry, but presumably they're doing good work. So there's a legitimacy of the ministry to a degree up until now. That people would say, look, they're doing wonderful work around the world. And it's all based on a lie.
And it seems like it's like, now obviously I'm not a psychiatrist or anything. I didn't know Ravi personally, so I can't speak into, is this just a person who kind of eventually went down the wrong road, or is this a person who sort of in a conniving way established this whole ministry so that he could kind of live out these abusive patterns of other people? But it certainly is a pretty ideal situation, I would think, when you have a framework of grace and sin and forgiveness and the power, and you're playing with souls. I mean, these are the lives of people, and the guilt that you can wield against people. It is sort of an ideal setup for predatory behavior, I would think.
And the research that I've done on this type of behavior and men that get involved, I mean, there these commonalities, these common elements. Oftentimes, they're very charismatic, right? They're very charming, and that includes me as an investigator. I've had in midst of my investigations where the respondent of an allegation is very, very charming, very some of them come in and they're guns a-blazing and they don't know how to kind of reframe that. Others are very, very charming. I'd rather deal with the guns a-blazing because I know what's going on. The real charming ones have a tendency to, I mean, if you look at predatory behavior in the church as a whole, there's going to be some commonalities there. And I've seen it. I've both investigated as well as had to address it from a personal perspective.
Now that the report doesn't go into credibility assessments, and that of course is this whole process where you have he said, she said of assessing who to believe. And I think, I mean, as we know, very often, this is just a way of saying, well, who can know, right? There, he says one thing, she says another. So could you say something in a sort of preliminary way about thinking about what a credibility assessment is and how even average people can begin to use their common sense when they're trying to weigh competing testimonies?
Absolutely. I'll give you an example. Years ago in the RCMP, in my former employment, there was, and this is all in the news, so I'm not sharing anything that's a secret. There was an allegation of sexual predatory behavior against one of my former colleagues, made by 4 women. And when it hit the news, not the news, but when it hit, kind of the rumblings and the gossip, et cetera, there was 2 camps set up. And one of the camps was absolutely not. These women are absolutely setting him up and they're trying to destroy him, et cetera, et cetera. The other camp is where I fell on is that even from a credibility, from an initial credibility perspective on probabilities, is it probable that 4 women who don't know each other are going to collude and conspire? 4 police officers are going to collude and conspire to destroy this guy's career. For what reason? What's more probable? And so you start to weigh out your probabilities, and just on its face, prima facie case, I look at that and say, it's more probable that it happened than not. So then you start to drill down. If I'm doing an investigation on what we have historically called a he said, she said investigation, we start to break down credibility. So what I would do if I was brought in to investigate Ravi Zacharias is exactly what I did on those cases that I was telling you about. I go to the resume. And so credibility, you've got someone that's defrauded his credentials, or not defrauded, but that has fraudulently presented his credentials from a credibility perspective on who's telling the truth on a certain situation or not. Already that credibility is starting to go down.
Right.
And so then when I present, say, well, who's likely to be telling the truth? The woman that came forward or the man that denies it? Well, the man that denies has already been exposed to be a fraud. So I'm probably not going to put a lot of weight on the credibility of his denial.
Well, in terms of Ravi, there are some quotes I just wanted to get from the report, because obviously there's a lot of whispering for years and allegations that were coming up, and he did manage to deflect them right up and really till the end of his life in last year, 2020. I wanted to just read a few quotes and then just kind of get your reaction again. So one young woman that he'd been groping her, and she was one of these massage therapists, she thought, quote, "Who would believe me?" against a famous Christian leader. And then another sentence, some RZIM staff told us that he expressed frustration with having to issue an apology at all. He was able to convince many that not only that he was innocent, but he was the victim of malicious evil. And that was with, I think, Lorianne Thompson's allegations from 3 years ago or so. And also with respect to Thompson, we read, because Mr. Zacharias was able to convince members of the board and management of the organization that he was the victim of extortionists, RZIM did not investigate the allegations. So I guess I just kind of like to throw out here, do you think that they dropped the ball here for one thing? Do you think that they did not do their due diligence?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, whether or not that was motivated from malice or whether it was just motivated from naivety, I don't know, right? I don't know enough about the case, but I wanted to talk about exactly, if you were to give me those, someone's evidence that would suggest that, the first thing that I would be looking for, and I teach this on my courses, is what's called DARVO. And it's a term coined by Dr. Jennifer Freyd out of the University of Oregon. And she's done a lot of research into the issue of sexual violence on campuses, on post-secondary campuses. And she coined the term DARVO. And what that means is deny, attack, so attack the credibility of your accuser, and then reverse victim offender. That's classic DARVO. What you just described there is classic DARVO. Denial and then attack the credibility of the person who's bringing it forward or alleging it took place, and then reverse victim offender. Don't you know that I'm the victim of this evil that's going on? They're going to be going to scripture to say, well, you know what, we should expect to be persecuted. Blessed are the persecuted.
Yeah.
And it's the evil that's happening now to them. That's classic DARVO. And when you're aware of DARVO in these types of cases, and I teach it on my courses, and everyone's like the big red, the light goes on newer investigators. They're like, that's DARVO. Yeah, be aware of it. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think a lot of people, they do have that eureka moment where we can remember when there was some person that we attempted to sort of maybe confront their behavior or challenge them on something, and suddenly it got flipped around and we were the bad person.
Yeah, absolutely.
You get a little glimpse of it in that moment.
And I love to, I guess we won't know till, on this side of heaven, but I'd like to know how much DARVO has gone on in the Christian community, whether it be Catholic, Protestant. You just need to Google sexual impropriety in the church and how much DARVO has gone on. I've personally confronted somebody, a former pastor, and it was classic DARVO.
Yeah, again, you have that language. Millions of souls, or uncounted numbers of people will be hurt. Our ministry will be hurt.
Yeah.
If you call this out now, so you just got to let it go.
And I'm the victim. Why would people, right? Is like I'm being now faced with evil, right? So now using terminology that is designed to evoke emotion within the Christian community, use the term evil. And it's Ravi Zacharias using the term evil. Therefore, wow, our brother's under attack right now. We better pray for the evil to stop. Sorry for being a little bit sarcastic there, but as I've been around, Christian community for a long time, and I've seen that type of stuff. I've seen stuff like that happen in prayer meetings.
Oh, I know. And I've been speaking out on Ravi for a few years now, and I've gotten countless responses like that I'm attacking essentially God's anointed.
Yeah.
That I'm hurting the church and so on. And of course, Steve Boffman, as you know, he's not a Christian, and people have constantly attacked his motives as well, right? So
you're seeking truth and speaking truth. Isn't that what we're called to do?
Yeah.
Where is the concept of God's justice and God's truth?
Yeah.
What we're going to cover up this type of behavior. How many souls have been destroyed as a result of his behavior? If everything that's come out is true, which I understand the report from the investigation, they're saying that there's actually worse things yet to come out. Right.
Again, there's the language he used, that if you speak out against me, millions of souls will be harmed. Well, how about the millions of souls that have been harmed by what he did?
That's right. So, yeah, and the trauma, because what people forget about is that, and of course, I hear people talk about, well, if it's consensual, it's a little bit different. Well, you really have to parse out the consent issue. Is it really consensual when you have that power differential? Is it really consensual when you have the spiritual abuse on top of that, the guilt trip? Is that consensual? And it just frustrates me when they say, well, it's a little bit different, it's consensual. The trauma that occurs as a result of, again, I'm going to say primarily men in those positions of power and authority, when they abuse that power and authority for sexual purposes, has a massive ripple effect. Because we know that the study of trauma and intergenerational trauma goes on and on and on, right? Sins of the father.
Yeah. Yeah, that one paragraph I read you there, she begins by saying she viewed him as a father figure. it just gets me right there. It's just awful.
And you as a dad,
yeah.
You want to, you don't want your daughter to be naive.
Yeah.
And because this type of behavior, whether it be within the church or parachurch or anywhere else, it goes on in many, many places, more than we would want to believe it goes on.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is why we're going to close in just a minute with a final word on what churches and Christian parachurch organizations can do to become a little bit better equipped. But I wanted to ask you just one more question about this report. So the most serious charge is rape. So they mentioned that there was one woman who reported that, I'll read it. This witness reported details of many encounters, that is, they had sexual encounters, intercourse, many encounters over a period of years that she described as rape. Now, of course, that's going to sound to many people a little bit hard to understand. What's going on? How can you be raped by the same person multiple times? Could you say something a little bit more about to give some sense to how to understand that allegation?
Well, it's so complex and interrelated with the trauma piece, right? And so, again, I would want to, sometimes people use terminology like rape, and then we assume it's, that stranger on stranger, violent, behind the bushes type of thing. But we know the concept of date rape is very real, and it's probably, I'm going to be honest, it's a little too complex for me to even have an opinion, other than to say is that if you look at some of the cases that have hit the news in the Me Too movement, there at times seems to be an element of, as I said, consent. And yet when you hear the women's testimony and when you understand that level of control, that psychological, and in Ravi's case, that spiritual control, that spiritual abuse that's going on there as well. It's not surprising that, a woman would use the term rape, even though it might not be what we think as the classic terminology of rape.
Right. All right. So a final word, closing words now. I want to get your thoughts on generally how the church, parachurch organizations, particular congregations can become more savvy and worldly wise in identifying predatory behavior within the church. And once you have some inkling something may be going on, where do you go from there?
Well, here's the thing. I think that in terms of why churches are potential, right, breeding grounds or grounds for men to engage in that behavior is number one is Christian naivety. There's a level of naivety that is oftentimes that I'm still surprised at, and Jesus never called us to be naive. Go out into the world as cunning as snakes or as wise as serpents, and gentle as doves. That means, like, don't be naive. And that naivety is where I think I've seen look at the financial cons that go on in the churches. The pyramid schemes and those types of things that sometimes hit the news. It's the same type of behavior, and it's based on some naivety where someone with a little bit of charisma, someone with a little bit of power, someone with a whole number of different things is brought into the fold. I'm saved by grace, and I'm all about grace. But that doesn't mean we have to be naive. And in fact, back in my younger days, when I first returned back to my Christian faith, I was buffaloed a little bit as well by a charismatic pastor, not in terms of sexual, but financial and other areas. So first off, we just really need to, and why not even teach about it? Why not have pastors actually teach? What does this mean? Are we to, just naively think that it's not going on in the church, because it is. And so that's the one thing. And then, the other thing I would say that I think that a lot of church, parachurch, Christian organizations, faith-based organizations, if they try to handle these things internally, they're going to botch it. Because they don't have the expertise to handle it. They don't have the understanding of evidence. They don't have the understanding of credibility assessments, coming to findings, doing their due diligence. And church, parachurch, faith-based organizations, they're still employers, and they have a duty of care as employers to follow the laws of the land. And that includes in areas such as sexual harassment, sexual violence, harassment, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a great area of risk. And then you see in this particular situation, if everything is, and there's no reason to disbelieve, if everything is as reported is true, you see how it could go from some of the largest ministries in the world to maybe your little local church, right?
Excellent thoughts.
Yeah.
So Bob, thanks a lot for joining me in this important discussion. I want to let people know that I'm going to include a link in the show notes just below to Veritas, so you can visit online. If you have any more questions, I think Bob would be okay with you if you want to contact him and ask questions about any situations you may be facing.
Absolutely.
And excellent.
Can I end with one story?
You may go ahead.
You're aware of this story because I think I debriefed with you about a half hour after it happened. I was in a situation many years ago where, as being a leader in my church, I had to confront a pastor who had been engaging in this type of behavior. And again, arguably consensual, but there had been indication that there had been several affairs that had gone on within the church. And so I actually met with him for coffee because I was in church leadership and he wanted to return to the church. And so I met with him for coffee, and he looked at me within about a minute with a sneer that I've seen it a lot in my life, but I certainly hadn't expected that a pastor would have that same type of sneer. And he looked at me and he said, "When are you going to stop being God's cop?" And it took me by surprise, but I didn't miss a beat. And I said, "Maybe when God stops needing them." And then the conversation didn't go on well after that. But again, classic DARVO, right?
Yeah.
And so I just leave you with that to finish it off.
It is classic DARVO. He tries to spin it around on you, but it was a perfect rejoinder. God needs cops. He's called us to be shepherds of the flock.
Absolutely. Yep.
Innocent as doves, but wise as serpents. So Thanks very much, Bob. It's been wonderful chatting with you about this very important topic.
Okay. Thanks, Randall.